Hello, so this is the DrawArray tutorial this time. If you guys watched DrawScatter already, there are some concepts that you probably already know. I'll try to go over them again here and let's dive into it. Those are some examples that I will showcase later, and I will go into the basics first. So for DrawArray, it had a lot of updates. This one is actually a version 2. And I have version 3 that's Blender 4.2 exclusive. And it has a lot of benefits, especially in terms of deformation, position, and scaling, some performance benefits. A lot of this comes from the new nodes from Blender 4.2, so I really encourage everyone to upgrade if they can. Otherwise, if you can't, I'll try to keep the other one up to date as much as possible. For Blender 4.0, 4.1. 4.0 starts to be quite hard because there's missing a lot of nodes that I'm using right now. So let's dive into it because there's a lot of updates and a lot of new stuff, especially including modules for DrawArray that were not present before. So I will start here with the basics of DrawArray 3 or 2, which are the same, roughly. So as for DrawScatter, you can choose a collection or a single object by picking it, which is way easier. And for those who already know, DrawArray automatically calculates the size of your assets. So if your assets has different sizes, it will push on the axis that is picked the assets to make sure they are always spaced evenly. So here, for example, I have very small spacing and see the space remain the same, and if I have the collection instead, here I put the spacing to 0, and every asset is placed right next to its neighbor. So this is very, very handy. We will see later with the example of the cars, for example. You can still choose to have fixed spacing. I recommend to push a bit more the spacing here before clicking it, and here it won't take in account the size of the assets, so they will be intersecting, but it can be useful, and it is much faster because it's working with instances, and this version actually without the deform to curve. This one is the fastest, only with fixed spacing, because it's working with instances. Deform to curve and the calculation requires to realize the instances, meaning it's a bit slower, but still fairly optimized anyways. So before going into the sorted instances, I will show how the snap to surface works. Same as DrawScatter, sorry. You click and then you have something that sticks to the surface that's below. Pretty easy. Of course, you can draw your curves and they will stick to the ground as much as possible as they can, and try to orientate as much as they can as well to the surface. You can remove the align to surface and it will try to keep the up faces as vertical as possible while following the curve. If you remove the deformed, they will just be placed like this, and deform basically makes the objects follow the curve and deforming them as they can. So you can see here they are being skewed, and if you add more geometry, now they will be deforming nicely. There is a seed that you can just change the order just to find something that you like. I want to show the sort instance before I move on because it's just going a bit into the order. Also, you can pick your axis, which defines which axis your instances will be facing on the curve, and the scaling corresponds to the axis you're working on. So you'll try its best to fit and realign the objects. Same if you scale them. Let's pick this axis for now. So you can see here it's repetitive. It's doing the same pattern as here compared to a random instancing. The way the axes are calculated is smart. It will pick the axis that it seems the most logical. So you don't need to align perfectly your object. You can see they are roughly aligned and it keeps the same. And if I invert the order, now I am having a different order there. It's just replicated the same way. So if I add another one, for example, another cube, here I have 2 cubes and I can have one between each. So you can create patterns like this depending on what you need. If you have a particular design, something that is man-made, I suppose, you could have this repetitive schematic of objects. So I'm just showing an example that might be a bit more obvious and interesting. So for example, I want to have this exact repetitive pattern with a larger pillar in the middle for a facade, for example. I can pick my facade and have the sort stance, and I merge these two. So I just need to this one and repeat it. So you can see that now I have this repetitive pattern. So it's really nice if you want to make man-made elements that have that sort of logic to it. And then you can always change the way things are ordered. See, like this, I'm even creating some sort of metal pillar. And where the pivot point is placed will define where the objects are instanced. So the pivot point will be on the curve, and then no matter what happens, will be depending on that. So if, for example, all of my pivot points at the bottom, now all of my objects will be aligned on the bottom. And if I scale and apply the scale here, I just have a way to draw this wall super fast. So like this, you can make logical elements thanks to the sort instance. So we saw before moving on, the convert to outline basically does what it says. It's transforming your curve into an outline. And the advantage is that that outline is symmetrical and your objects will be instanced facing each other. So let me grab this asset, for example, remove that. If you invert the outline distance, they can face away if you want. And while I'm here, I can just play around with another feature, which is the fact that this uses the tilt. So you can tilt your curve if I select only one. So you can start creating crazy stuff like that. So yeah, having fun with the tilt. And you can also scale with Alt S or changing the radius here. So Control T to change the tilt and Alt S to change the scale. And with the outline, you can create very easily this sort of double helix. It's really up to you. And then the shape can change at any point, which is very, very cool. And you can duplicate it and you can just work on your fun designing that. Let's say even if I want to have a circle, I could have this as a circle with or without an outline. I can invert it. And you could rotate one of them crazy, but it's fun. And Alt S, you can scale. And so that's for the basics. Yeah, that's pretty cool how it goes below like this. Now going on to some of the changes, the differences with the previous versions. So the transforms are working better in the version 3, and they are dependent on the curve itself. So if I put it to 0, because it will be easier to understand what's happening. So the position X doesn't work when it's deforming on curve, because it's already calculating the space between them. But if you are not in deform on curve, you can move, and it will be based on the position that they have, so that they are normal. And here, same. So it works the same way for both of them. So you should have the same result most of the time. And then you have the random, which is really cool now, because when you're on deform to curve, the random position on X will be following the curve always. That's very useful if you have, for example, longer spacing, and then you can have a bit more randomness. It's gonna intersect because this can't calculate, but it gives more natural freedom. And then if you want to add more randomness, add a difference in the Y or in the Z. And the Z has that feature which is only up, because in general, if you have your assets sitting on the ground or on the terrain, you probably don't want them to go below. So I just have this, you can toggle on and off, and depending if you go positive or negative, it goes below or above the surface. So same with rotation, same principle. You rotate based on the actual orientation, and then you have the random based on the same orientations. So you can have this. So a random rotate like this is pretty cool. You can change the scale. The scale is gonna also change the way the assets are calculated. So on each axis, so it will recalculate every time you change the axis, and have the two other ones corresponding. And then the random scale, which is the same principle. One feature that I added, which is really nice, is the ability to have offset of the UVs. So if I select this cube, for example, and make a bit of space, I will change its texture. Let's add a checker texture just to show a bit slightly more contrast. So here you can see that, and a straight line would be more obvious. You can see that the assets share exactly the same UV. And it's a bit repetitive. If you have a procedural map or a seamless texture, you can use the tiling of the UVs to change it and give it more variation on each. So it is incremental, so it will change and eventually they will all look different. And you can do it on the X or in the Y axis. So this is a really cool feature. It's just an offset, so it's not gonna touch the first one, but all the other ones. It's just to give more options to add randomization and natural feeling to your assets. The only thing just to keep in mind, it's not as important, but if you are on the fixed axis, which is the lightest one, when it's only dealing with instances instead of mesh, you can see it when, for example, you see when you have overlapping assets, here the orange outline goes around and doesn't cross. It means that all of these are one object because the instances has been realized. So it's actual geometry. But when you see that the outline overlaps here, it means that they are separate objects, so still instances. So it's a way for you to know, just as tips. So offsetting the UVs will transform the object from an instance to a realized object. It's not too important, but if you have 50,000 of this one arrayed or instanced, you might tank a bit your performances if you start offsetting your UVs afterwards. But the system is still quite optimized, so you should be fine. So now here I just wanted to show that you don't necessarily have to work with curves. This is a mesh. It's actually 4 edges. And I can show you if I create just a plane and I put DrawArray on it. You can also instance on your edges, which is really cool because then you have the opportunity to just bevel the way you like and you can really work as if you had a mesh without having to worry on how the assets are placed on your edges. So this is really cool. You could also just delete only the faces to keep just the edge so you don't have the preview here. And then you can still walk the same way and have everything that you want. So that's a very cool feature because I like doing this, especially when I want to array things on a straight line. I prefer to use an edge than a curve because you can define the length exact that you want. And if you need to, you can even have corners. So I really like working with edges. Here, I wanted to show the feature that is a full collection feature. Of course, I moved this one without removing it from the collection. And the full collection allows you to have an assembly of objects like this to have a variation of color. So you can have different objects that are separated and then have them arrayed on your design. So the modifier will calculate the bounding box and array them correctly. So you can see that you can scale, you can do anything you want. You can change the axis and see what it does to your design. And you can even turn this into an outline if you want to have, for example, a double lane instead of one. So the full collection is really cool. I'll show you an example with the space station later. Here, I want to talk about the modules that I created because I wanted to expand even more the possibilities and how you can control your arraying and instancing without adding complexity to DrawArray itself. Because I want people to get comfortable with how it works and then not have to worry about it changing or becoming more complex over time. So that's where the idea of modules came from. And basically the modules, for now there's only 3, I'm planning on having more. They are sort of add-ons to the DrawArray or DrawScatter. And they do a couple of stuff. So the first one is the boundary isolate. So you need to get it and put it before. And you can see that now it removed all of the unnecessary edges inside. Because here what I have is a mesh with a couple of subdivision inside. And of course DrawArray will take every edges and then just array on it. But what we want sometimes is just to have the borders. And for example, if I subdivide a bit more here and then delete these faces, you could have these borders having that design. See, so that's the big advantage of having this. One thing that you need to keep in mind if you want to have the boundary isolate working is that you cannot have just one polygon here, because then it doesn't know for the one in the middle, it doesn't know how to isolate it. So you need to add one subdivision in the middle. So now there's two empty edges and then the boundary is outside of it. So that's why here I added a bit of subdivision, because if I remove, for example, these two, now it doesn't know, because there's only one face here between these two and one here. So if I add one more subdivision between, it's able to isolate it. If I find a way to make this work better, I will update the way the algorithm works. But for now, it's not too much trouble, I guess. So that's the first one, boundary isolate. It's fairly easy, but it's very useful. If you want to create, for example, a platform or anything with a barrier around, that's cool. I'll show you an example after when I use this. The second one is the EdgeSelect, and this one, the way it works, I will duplicate, oops, sorry, I don't have the screencast. I will duplicate this cube, this rectangle, and cancel the transformation, so I have two of them on top of each other. I will call the EdgeSelect. So this one uses a vertex group to select edges on a mesh and then remove the other ones. So by default it's on invert selection, because otherwise you wouldn't see the mesh anymore, especially when the vertex group doesn't exist. So yeah, don't forget to remove it after. So what you need to do is create a new group and name it exactly the same way it's written here. You can create your own names, but for now this is one that I've put just as a suggestion. And if I come and, okay, let's bring a DrawArray first and instance a bunch of these there. A bit big, so now you can see it's chaos. But what you can do then is come and select some of the edges and assign them to the vertex group, and you can invert it. And now there was a bad rotation on my windows. So now the windows are being instanced on the only edge that is selected. Facing inside, I can just rotate them. And I can move the object itself, so the pivot point is straight on the back, so they are sticking out a bit more. So it requires a bit of steps, right, to have this working, and I wanted to save time and energy for everyone. So I started to build a tiny script that will do this more automatically. So you can go in edit mode and then right click, and for those who use texture blender, they are aware of or probably more used to the QP tools. Now that I am adding QP tools and tiny scripts all over the workflow, I have other ones that I want to create. I will probably release the tools for everyone to have, not being linked to one of the products, because I want them to be useful and as they are to me, and I'm creating them in a way that they don't need to work with my add-ons or my products, so everyone could benefit from them. So once you select this one, I will change a bit the way it works. But overall, it will be a way to select edges and assign them to a vertex group. So you can use existing one, it will list the one that exists. Otherwise, you can create your own name. If I use an existing one, which is EdgeSelect, I click and then it will add the vertex group to your selection. But now you can see, as earlier, I need to have separation. Otherwise, it doesn't know what to do. And the problem is that now, when I create new subdivision, it just interpolates. So I just need to start over. So I still need to fix some of the orientation stuff on when working with edges. It's not always easy to find what's happening because we don't have as much control as for curves. But the advantage is that you can also duplicate this preset, your windows, and choose the other window. And now if you go in edit mode and you select these ones, instead of using EdgeSelect, I'm gonna create another one, rounded windows. And then now it will assign only to the rounded windows. And you can see that it updated here which vertex group automatically. So that's one feature of the script, but you can definitely do it by hand. Don't remove any of these because all of these three meshes share the same topology. And what's cool is that now you can have your facade and then tweak it as you want. So that's one way to have some procedural elements. So that's for the edge select. And now one that is also really useful and probably one of the most fun one and quite versatile is the TrimCurve. What I've done here, I have two arrays. I have one where I trimmed the curve from the ends and one where I trimmed it from the middle. So if I just duplicate this one and start over, I have this, which is just the cube, the most simple array. Give some space so you can see it more. I will bring the trim curve, put it before as always. By default it comes like this. It trims from the middle and using relative mode. The relative mode is a percentage of the length of the curve. So at 0, none of them have anything, and then at 1, they all have the same. So you can trim from the beginning or from the back, and then basically you can see that you keep only the middle. If I switch, I will keep only the ends and the percentage in the middle. And so if I change, I have more and more cubes, and then the space also in the middle is moving, is increasing. That's why I added the absolute version of the trimming, which is based on scale. So this one, if I have a set scale, it will always be the same, even if I scale the curves. For example, if I draw one that's way bigger, you see I still have only 2 of them, even if my curve is way bigger. So this is very useful for cables like that, because what I did here is just to have the trim curve with the absolute being set up first, and then the only thing I did was to switch from curve end to the curve middle, and I have now the middle part of my cables. If there is a bit of gap, you can always tweak it to make things match exactly as you want. And here you have it. You have a cable that you can just draw around, and it will always have a bit of a bug here. And what you can do, for example, is duplicate the middle one. I will change for the cylinder again. If you want to have some sort of connectors, and then you can have connectors that are in the middle, will never overlap with your connector at the end, and scale this one down, see, and now you can start having way more complex sort of cables. And if you want to add some random positioning, you can also have that to give more life to your cables. So that's it for all of the settings and all of the modules that I wanted to show you. Now I will go more into showing examples that are fun. Ready? So these are some that I've shown in the trailer, showcasing the fact that it's very useful to have the ability to scatter assets like this without having to worry for them to intersect. So you know that they are going to be well placed, and then you can just draw around some curves and have them being placed correctly. Here, for example, also I have the highway being generated all at once, and it's very easy to do. Let me show you. I will just draw another Bezier curve, roughly straight, and call DrawArray. So what this is, basically there's a few elements. So these are separate elements. This one is a collection, and this one is separate. What you can do is just select your elements one by one. Let's take the road. Here, if I want to replicate exactly the same, I convert it into an outline. I'm gonna add this again. Every time I start a new scene, I need to add it. Alt D, this one, just changing the asset. Pavement, I can have it being, I don't know if it's a pavement, but it's sort of like pedestrian crossing. On the outline, so really straight on the outline. Alt D, this sort of barrier that I can have, same hanging out here. And if it's a bit in the ground, you can always change its position up. I want to have the same one and use it in the middle. Maybe I don't want the road to be separated, so this could be the middle part. I will Alt D this one again, select the lamppost, and what lamppost do we want them to be in the center or on the outside? Oh, I did put some in the center, so let's do this. So sometimes there is some calculation. I need to figure out how I can fix it to have things line up perfectly. Very smooth, works. Oh, I'm not on deform to curve for any of them. I need to add this, that will help. And also if I want to have a deformed mesh, that will help also. So now I have the basic, and what I can do is Alt duplicate again my road, I remove the outline just because that's the way I built this one, and I will road support, that's my collection, and click on full collection, of course. If I forget, that's not good. Shift it below the road. I can have it stick out like that, or even more, or I can fit right there if I want to, and add once more, duplicating the road this time because I just want to have the pillars, and that's way too many pillars. Up, shifting below the supports, and these are not supposed to be outlined, and this sounds like it's gonna break, so let's scale this up a bit more. And here you go. And now every time you draw a curve, you have your full setup applying. So very useful. And then here for the cars it's the same. In that case, I draw on the surface. I don't need to snap on anything. It's not necessary. And depending on the order in which you draw, it's gonna define the orientation. So you can add a bit of traffic. Here, it's more of what you would expect when you think of drawing around, sketching, and then scattering objects. A lot of trash, a lot of chaos. Everyone loves that. So here, for example, if I have the one with the splinters, I can just draw them around, really scribble. And the advantage of having the draw on surface applied is that the more I draw on top of each other, they will start piling up. So you can create a pile of mess like that just by drawing some assets very quickly. That's a bit too much to see what's happening around. Here I have another setup that is a sort of biome. This is DrawScatter actually, but I can still show you. So for the ones that saw the tutorial on DrawScatter, I have my bigger assets scattered at the center of my setup, and then the other one that are more in the middle, and these ones that are an outline. So the tiny leaves, they will always be only on the outline. And the advantage is that if I draw a smaller surface, I will have only the small assets appearing. And then the bigger I make it, the more I have the bigger assets as well. So you can control your details, and then in that case, the mess that you're making around in that scene. So you can just draw and add a lot of chaos very quickly. This is just 3 setups. One that is using the trash, one that is using collection of a trash bin, one that is using collection of tiny cans and stand, and the leaves. Here, another example is the pizza one. So this one is instancing pizza boxes along the curve, and then on the outline there is the pizza slices, which is cool to just have the pizza slices around the pizza box, and you can have them more or less spread out. Here, this is just to show the ability to... the advantage of having the size calculated basically of the object. Because even if you have different sizes, you can have them being spread exactly like you want, even with a gap if you need to. So it is very useful. And here it's another automatic setup with the leaves being an outline again, these ones being an outline but further away, and then another outline, and then just a basic road, which is these assets. And I have 2 of them to have less repetitive aspect. But actually with the newer version, this is an older version just that I made before updating, you could even offset the UVs to have more variation and then hide even more that is repetitive. Another example here, it's how when you have different assets like this separated, you can reconstruct them and have them being a modular element. So if I, for example here, take only one of the edges, you can see that everything is following. So working with edges, I want to add another module where I would be able to choose which edge to flip or not, to choose what's inside, what's outside. But for now, it's like this. So I can show you how I did this from scratch. Let me just delete these so I can just show you. I can create a plane. I will just delete the inside. Well, we can keep it. It can be your floor, our floor. So adding DrawArray, and now I can pick my objects one by one, make them deform to curve. If it's too low, I can just raise it a bit more. I think it's fine. And if it's intersecting here, you can also push it on the normals. And after, the only thing you need to do is just Alt duplicate, change the assets, raise it up. You could just raise up the curve And if you don't have that plane at the bottom, which I would suggest, you could do this, but it has advantages of only using this in terms of computation. I think it works better with the version 3 of DrawArray, but still, it's up to you. Me, I like to work this way, and I try to not block everyone with my way of working, so you have the option. So just duplicating and then instancing on top. Once more for the tiny one at the top, and here you go, and now you have it. And for example, if this one you would like to offset it, you can always push it even a bit beyond, so we can see all of the nice molding, and then have this one match. This a bit too far, let me see correctly. And here you have your room. You just need to select one. You can duplicate your plane, and you can scale it. If you want, you can go into vertex mode, Control B and V to bevel the vertex, and then you can just bevel it. If you scroll your wheel, you can add subdivision, and it's very fast to populate a scene like this and then work with your design, because you can work from the block out and then just update your assets eventually. You could have just one wall and then replace, and you know that everything will fit the way you expect. Another one here is just to showcase the TrimCurve and how with the design that's questionable of a cable, you can just draw around and then have them being respecting what you've been doing. And here I didn't do it, but I could add some randomness on the position. So here I'm drawing on the surface, but for example, if I have cursor, then you can draw, so you can just draw hanging cables. This one is to show how you can play with the full collection to create a space station. And it's only these modules that are doing the whole space station. So you can move them around, you can even scale and see what happens. I like that you can just a bit work with chaos and you see what happens. Because here you could also, that's an older version, but you can still rotate to see what happens and see the shapes that you're making. And basically it's just a full collection of this one. You can scale. So if I duplicate this one and I don't know, rotate it 190 degrees, add an outline, you can just experiment. See, I'm just playing with the rotation and the values, and then I'm finding something that's... So here the full collection is really cool, and see how very quickly you can create a lot of noise, a lot of shapes, and always be able to continue working with your module and change the shape and see what happens. I have a bunch of other examples that are more recent in the way I use DrawArray, because it's so versatile. I wanted to show how you can use it for more man-made design, like sci-fi, or even creating facades and things like this. Here, for example, I just have this module that I can instance and create a wall like this that's just made out of these 3 blockout modules. And because they are instanced, I can always come here, and if I want to add some design aspect to it, you can always do it at any point because it's procedural. So that's a big benefit of working this way, because you can work with your blockout and work your way into the final piece without having to redo everything once you have your basic shapes. So this is a very cool way to work, I think, because you can save so much time. This one is using the full collection to create these windows. So for example, this one I have a basic design, and let's say I have feedback, I have retakes, or I just want to improve the way it's designed. You can just take some of the shapes and then redo the way it looks. I don't know, I'm just messing around to see what happens. So you can always do this, and then every time you use these shapes to your scene, it will be replicated. So it's kind of working with shape language more than even working with assets at this point, because you're making sure that the language is coherent. Here is to show the boundary isolate, which is really cool in that case to create this platform, for example. You can create that and have a platform that is dynamic. So if I come and, for example, create a hole here, I have my edges being populated. And this is getting even more crazy into how you can use DrawArray, because here there's a 3-step process. Sorry. I'll try to make sure that the concept is clear I hope it will translate well. So I have one module here that is just a simple modeling. There's very not much to this. Here I have a first DrawArray that is made on an edge that I beveled. So I can deform my first module, and then I can use this one to create a full wall or a full array based on this version that is curved. In that curved version, I can change it at any point. And same, see when I was talking about shape language. Now everything that uses this module is updated at once. So it's more using this as a shape than an actual object. So if I try to recreate from scratch to see if it's clearer, I'll move this one around. So let's say I have part of this that I want to be, okay, I'll do something simple. A bit like that, but inverted. I need a bit more subdivision to be able to deform it. Will use only one axis, so it's not too bad. I don't need to deform on the other ones. So maybe I can add a bit more roundness to it. Nice. So after engineer, what I would do, in this case, because I like to work with edges, I will create a plane, select everything and M to merge at center, and then I have only one edge at the center, and I can extrude it. And so now, if I isolate, you can see this edge, so I will just extrude it like that. And what I like doing as well, it's just something I like to do, and because it requires a few steps, I will probably make a script for it. Create a bevel modifier, put it into weight, and then going into edges here, and increasing putting to vertex mode and adding the weight. So now if I add some subdivision, I can have procedural bevel. So I don't need to deal with everything, I just need to deal with a very few vertex. So now that I have this, I can go and call DrawArray and bring this asset in. So I could rotate this 90 degrees so it fits, and there's not enough subdivision. And now I have my rounded wall. And so what you can do from now, using the same technique, plane, merging everything at the center, extruding my edge, calling DrawArray, and bringing this here. And now you have a pattern that can be deformed and that will always follow just an edge. So you can always rework it, you can always continue bending it, you can go further, of course. It's freaking out a bit, but okay, that's why I need to be able to reverse the curve. But here you go. So you can have very complex designs and very complex rounded shapes. Everyone will tell you it's just a nightmare to work with, because it's always like, how do you deal with this plus the curvature plus the roundness? With that setup, you can at any point continue changing your design and continue changing your shape, create another hole here, for example. So this is very powerful. I think it's not easy to realize that you can do it with DrawArray. That's why I wanted to put on the accent of the possibility. So here, for example, you could use this one instead. Not this one. You could use this one instead. And start creating crazy organic shapes. And you can even Alt-D this one and choose this one and have both of them interact with each other. I'm just messing around, but you can see how versatile this is. And then the more layers that you add, the crazier it's gonna look. Let's try changing the axis and see what happens. And here it's another example of what I was doing earlier with the twisting and the scaling. So I've showed, I'm not gonna go over it again. This one I just wanted to show because it could be useful for certain cases. If you want to have this type of helix, and you could even maybe, not really. So the advantage of having things, so if I remove all of the transforms, you can see that these steps are aligned exactly on the curve here. This is because I put the cursor on the corner here. So if I, for example, select this one and align it on the vertex, the top corner will be positioned here. And then if I offset, you can offset it and you can see as if there was a pillar at the center. So this is really cool. And then you can add, if you want, a small random position to add a bit of randomness, very, very small amount of random rotation. So you can add a bit more life to something like this. You can increase the spacing. And one aspect that's quite important to know, by default, when you create a curve, the resolution is by 12 here. And it's not enough to sample here all of the steps on that curve that is basically 2 points. So the trick here is to increase the resolution to a number, but if you just drag and on the right, you will reach a point where it says 64 and still not enough. That's a soft limit. It means that you can just input the number that you want here. 256, it's more than enough. And here, if I continue raising the amount, you can see it works still pretty well. And if you don't have enough eventually, you can put more, and then it's gonna recalculate and have better calculation. So you can play around and stack stuff the way you want. And the why it's being rotating like this on itself is because it has a big tilt. That's why it looks like without the tilt. So it's just a stack of objects. It can be books, it can be anything. But then with Ctrl T, I can rotate them, until I'm satisfied. And you can, if you would like, Alt S, you can scale up or down. And this one is just a quick example to show that you can use modifiers also. For example, this one is just what we've been doing before with these patterns. For example, if I use this new one we created together, or that you watched me create, I guess. You can just have that. You can invert it like this and have a very cool organic spaceship corridor. And with the mirror, you can play around. You can have them intersect or connect. And if I come at any point and take this one, I can always extrude it to fit my new design and the new need. And here you go. And all of them that are using the same have been updated. But I can always copy this one and remove the change that I've just made and reference this one again. But these two still refers to this one. That's the advantage of being procedural that way, is that the design will still be updated if you change your initial shape. All of them are being updated at once. So that's all for DrawArray. I think it's already quite a lot. I hope you're gonna enjoy. I'm using it for absolutely everything now. It's so versatile and it's so useful. I'm continuing to think of ways to develop it and add more modules that will help control some aspects or open up other opportunities. And like I was saying in the tutorial for DrawScatter, when version 2 and version 3, which will drop at the same time for DrawArray and DrawScatter, it will be the same bundle of update. When they drop soon, the price will also augment a bit because I'm working a lot on these nodes and on these tools, and people who bought it previously will always get the updates for free. So if you want, you can grab it now, or otherwise wait for the updates to see what's up. And yep, see you in the next one for DrawMesh, which is completely new.